fine, but he's really now has back to being an undeveloped queen, and you can see how I'm starting to build control of the center. So he decides he has to trade off. Bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5. I'm threatening the pawn over here, so he plays c6, bishop back to b3, he plays rook f d8. He's trying to control the center. So what do I do over here? Well, I've got a lot of open space over here on this file. I've got a half-open file over here, and this is what I'm going to take advantage of it. They call it a half-open file, by the way, if you're a little bit of a beginner. If the opponent has a pawn on that file, but you don't, that's a very good file to attack, because sometimes it's very hard to defend a pawn. Now, obviously, I have a half-open file over here, but because his rook is all the way back here, this is a little less vulnerable at this time. This pawn over here is something that I want to attack, and in fact, I've got two pieces on this, so he's got to bring his rook back to defend this piece over here. So I play rook d3. What I'm going to do, obviously, very simple. Get all three major pieces on this file. Three major pieces on a file is a tremendously strong battery, as they call it, and if I can do that, it's not going to be easy for him to defend this three times. I can eventually win this pawn. He plays knight f6, threatening, obviously threatening this pawn in case the queen ever leaves its defense, and getting the knight back into the action. Not a bad move. I play rook f d1. Now I have three pieces on this file, and now the thing I realized, and first of all, he plays knight e d8 to protect this. Now, obviously, I can't go in. Even now, right now, he's got three pieces defending, and I've got three pieces attacking. But even if I had an extra piece attacking, I couldn't simply take it with the queen, because then he just takes the queen with the rook, and even though I win the rook back, I've lost a queen for a rook and a pawn, which is obviously not worth it. So I've got to get my battery in a position where the queen isn't the lead one. The strongest type of battery very often is when the queen is in the back. When you have a queen, let's say here, and a rook here, and a rook here, they called that the Alekhine battery, because a famous grandmaster named Alekhine used to play that all the time. But in any case, so I played my queen back to f2. Let's see, I'm just wondering why he couldn't just take this pawn with the queen. I haven't really looked at it that thoroughly. It's possible that he missed that, and it's possible that I missed that. Possibly both missed that, because he played knight c7. Now I played queen d2. Now again, I've got the battery over here. Now he can still take this pawn, but I'm going to control this file. For example, if he takes d4, I take c6, d6, if he takes e4, I take d6 with the pawn, and even though that's even, I'm going to have control over this file, which is obviously a very important file. So he plays knight e8. Now I play e5. Now see, even though he's got this three times defended, and I've got this three times attacked, my playing e5 now puts this pawn in peril. The important thing of the Alekhine battery over here, and notice what this does, and notice how powerful this is because that pins the pawn. The pawn can't take this pawn, because then I take the rook, he takes back, I take back, he takes back, I take back, I end up with an extra rook, and I win the game, obviously. So he can't. So this pawn is now pinned. So the only thing he can do without giving up this pawn is to play d5, which I have four pieces attacking it now, although it's defended by a pawn. So I simply play c4, and now this pawn is toast. Why is this pawn toast? Again, he can't take it for the same reason. If he takes it, I take the rook. He takes back, I take back, he takes back, I take back. I win the extra rook. Yes, he takes the bishop. After that, and then I retake, but I'm still up the exchange. I would be up a rook against the bishop. And he couldn't even do that anyway, because then I would take the knight. So he would lose the game, certainly, if he takes it. So now, basically, because of that, because of the fact that I was able to establish this battery and get all that extra space in the center, I've won the pawn. So he plays knight c7, defending the pawn again, but it's not enough, because let's count. I've got 1, and then 2, because his bishop's behind it, 3, 4, 5 pieces attacking, and he's got 1, 2, 3 pieces defending. Obviously not nearly enough. So, no reason to waste any more time. C takes d5, c takes d5, bishop takes d5, and now I'm up a pawn. And not only am I up a pawn, as you'll see in a minute, I have still very solid central control. He plays knight takes d5. Again, a pretty solid move. Even though he's slightly behind, you don't generally want to trade, but in this case, he's trading a weak piece for a strong piece. I mean, his knight is certainly not nearly able to control as much action as my light-squared bishop would be. I mean, notice how solid my light-squared bishop, especially because my pieces are on the dark squares. Eventually, I'm probably going to move this piece to protect these, and you always want to have your bishops on the diagonals where your pawns are not. If you have a whole bunch of pawns, and the reason for that is it has more mobility. It can control more area. So, and his knight over here is pretty weak, so he takes it. Knight takes d5, rook takes d5, and since again I have total control of this file, if he moves the rook, I keep control of that. So he takes rook takes d5, queen takes d5. Okay, so now I've got an extra pawn. Now what do I do with it? It's too early to make a pawn push over here, obviously. I can play f5. That's very dangerous. His queen is still on the board. If he somehow managed to get in here and get in behind over here and put my pawns at jeopardy, I could still lose this game. What I need to do is take advantage of the advantage that I do have. What's the advantage that I have? Not only the extra pawn, but also control of the file. So what you always want to do in the endgame, if you have major pieces, try to get your pieces down to the 7th rank. The 7th rank is really where they, especially rooks, where they cause their most havoc. So he plays rook e8. I played queen d7. Now he doesn't absolutely have to trade. He could put his queen out here with check, for example. But this pawn is going to be in a little bit of trouble. I mean, he can protect it, it's fine, but he has to protect it in a way that salvages the rook. Obviously, he can't just come down here right away because then I take the rook. If he comes over here, check, and I move my king, then he can move the rook, and that's fine, but again, he hasn't really gained anything because I still have control of this file. So he plays queen d7, queen takes d7, rook takes d7. Now I've got a rook on the 7th rank. I've got very active piece, and his rook is much more of a passive piece. He has to play rook b8. You don't want to do that. You don't want to have your rook pinned down to protecting your own pawns. But in this case, he has no choice. If he would have moved the b pawn, then the a pawn falls. He's already down one pawn. Down one pawn, you can still get a draw. If the other person makes an extremely bad play, you can still win. But generally, you're down a pawn, you're still playing for a draw. If all the other all the other pieces would disappear, and there's just a pawn and a king against a king, in most cases that's a draw. I mean, there are cases if the king's ahead of the pawn where you can get a win in that case, but in most cases, if you're down by a pawn, what you want to do is try to trade everything down to the point where you have only one pawn against the king, where you can stop the pawn from queening, obviously. So, what's my strategy over here? Again, my advantage here. I have the extra pawn. I have the rook in a good position. The rook can't do anything immediately. The rook can move around here, but that's not really going to help. But I still do have a good offensive piece that hasn't been activated yet. That's ready to get into the action. What is that? That, of course, is the king. King f2. A king in the endgame, they say, is almost as valuable as a rook. I mean, obviously, a king, is the game. If you don't have the king, you lose the game. You need the king. But in terms of offensive firepower, I've read that a king is somewhere around 4 points worth of material in terms of its offensive value, in terms of its offensive strength, and a rook is 5. So a king could be a very strong piece. And my strategy, rather than trying to rush the pawns, which if I do, it's not going to work. I mean, just trying to rush the pawns. If he moves his king over here, he might force my king. He might force my rook out of this rank. But the point is, I'm not going to be able to win this game just with the rook alone. So it's time to march the king into the action. He plays a6. Obviously, he wants to move these pawns up so that the rook isn't pinned. He could use it a little more offensively. No problem. Let's take a little bit of that time and get the monarch into the action. King e3. He plays g6. Again, trying to just eliminate the devastation that this rook can cause. The fewer pawns that you have on the 7th rank, at least the less devastating a rook is. King e4, no problem. I'm still going to march right down. King f8. Now he's got to move his king over to protect himself. King d5. Again, continuing the march. Obviously, my goal is to get over here. If I ever get over here, then he has to move the rook, and this pawn is going to fall. King e8. Now, by the way, you might say, well, hold on a second. Am I worried about my back rank? If he ever, for example, moves the rook here and then comes down here, he's going to wipe out all these pawns. But I figured that I had enough time to wipe out his pawns first, and that if he was going to use his rook to come all the way down, he wasn't going to have enough time to do that. So he plays king e8, which threatens to move my rook out. If I, for example, move my rook to the f file, to the c file, then he could move his rook over here with check. If I move my king, maybe he comes down here. He has some counter chances. He has some chances for offensive play. So I played king d6. Now, that might allow him to trade off rooks, which it does. In fact, what he did was he